What would happen if you got stuck deep inside a narrow cave and realized you might never get out? What would your situation be then? That's exactly what we're about to talk about in this video. The horrific cave exploration disaster that took place in Utah. Even today, that place sends chills down your spine just thinking about what happened that night. This is the story of the Nutty Putty Cave exploration disaster. To understand what happened in Nutty Putty Cave, you need to understand what it was, how it came to be. Most caves form from the top down. Rain becomes slightly acidic as it falls through the atmosphere, picks up more acid from decaying vegetation, then seeps into cracks in limestone. Over thousands of years, the water dissolves the rock, carving chambers and corridors as it follows the path of least resistance deeper into the earth. These are called epigenetic caves, and they tend to have certain predictable features. Stalactites hang from ceilings. Stalagmites rise from floors. The passages often follow logical patterns. Nutty Putty Cave was different. It formed from the bottom up, created by superheated water forced upward from deep beneath the Earth's surface. This hydrothermal activity occurred millions of years ago, when geological forces pushed boiling water through fissures in the bedrock. The heat and pressure dissolved the limestone from below, creating a chaotic network of tunnels that twisted and turned without rhyme or reason. These are called hypogenic caves, and they are far less predictable than their downward-formed cousins. The result was a cave system that extended 1,400 feet horizontally and reached depths of 145 feet below the surface. A labyrinth of narrow passages that corkscrewed through solid rock, some barely wide enough for a human body to pass through. The cave had been forming for millions of years, but it would only be discovered by humans in 1960. Dale Green found it by accident that year, drawn by warm vapors rising from the hill on a cold day. He and his friends ventured inside with flashlights and curiosity, crawling through passages lined with something strange. A soft, brown clay that coated the walls and could be molded by hand, that would shift from solid to liquid when squeezed. It reminded Green of a children's toy popular at the time. He initially considered calling it Silly Putty Cave, but settled on something that sounded better: Nutty Putty Cave. The clay was composed of silicon dioxide particles, so small they were measured in microns. Particles 3 times smaller than the width of a human hair. The clay had another peculiar quality that cavers would discover over the years. It was sound active. If you yelled at it, it would ooze and move, responding to vibration in ways that seemed almost alive. In the decades after its discovery, Nutty Putty became something of a legend in the Utah caving community. It was not beautiful in the traditional sense. There were no grand chambers adorned with formations, no underground rivers or massive stalactites. What it offered instead was challenge. The passages were tight enough to require specific techniques, narrow enough to create genuine fear, but navigable enough that people kept coming back. John Edward Jones was 26 years old that November. He stood 6 feet tall and weighed 200 pounds. He had dark hair, an easy smile, and the kind of steady presence that put people at ease. He was in his second year of medical school at the University of Virginia, pursuing a career as a pediatric cardiologist. He had a wife named Emily and a 13-month-old daughter named Lizzie. Emily was pregnant with their second child, due in June. John had grown up in Stansbury Park, Utah, about 40 miles northwest of Nutty Putty Cave. His childhood had been filled with outdoor adventures. His father was an avid caver who had taken John and his younger brother Josh on spelunking expeditions throughout Utah since they were children. The brothers had explored dozens of caves together, learning the techniques and safety protocols, developing a deep appreciation for the underground world. But it had been years since John had been caving. Medical school consumed his time. Marriage and fatherhood had shifted his priorities. The caves of his childhood had become memories, stories he told, but experiences he no longer sought out. Until Thanksgiving week of 2009, John, Emily, and Lizzie flew from Virginia to Utah to spend the holiday with family. They had exciting news to share: the pregnancy, the baby growing inside Emily, the expanding family. It was supposed to be a joyful visit, a brief escape from the pressures of medical school, a chance to reconnect with loved ones and familiar landscapes. Josh had an idea. Their parents were hosting Thanksgiving dinner in a few days. Why not do something together before the holiday chaos began? Something that would remind them of childhood. Something that would let the brothers reconnect the way they used to. He suggested Nutty Putty Cave. John hesitated at first. It had been so long. He was not the skinny kid who had followed his father through tight passages anymore. He was bigger now, heavier, his body changed by adulthood and a decade of less active living. But the idea appealed to him. They gathered a group. Josh invited friends. By the time they arrived at Blowhole Hill on the evening of November 24th, there were 11 people total. A large group by caving standards, but they had obtained the proper permits. They had the required experienced cavers. Everything was legal and approved. The sun was setting as they approached the entrance. The temperature was dropping. A few days before Thanksgiving in Utah meant cold nights, but the cave would be warmer. It always stayed around 70 degrees inside, regardless of the weather above. They gathered at the entrance at 8 o'clock in the evening. Headlamps were checked. Plans were discussed. Then, one by one, they squeezed through the 30-inch opening and descended into darkness. The first hour went smoothly. The group navigated the initial passages without incident, making their way to a large chamber called the Big Slide. It was one of the more spacious areas of the cave, a place where people could actually stand, where the oppressive tightness of the tunnels gave way temporarily to something approaching comfort. They rested there, talked, laughed. The trip was going well. Then John, Josh, and two friends decided to seek out a greater challenge. They wanted to find the birth canal, one of the cave's most famous passages. A tight squeeze that required cavers to contort their bodies in specific ways, but ultimately opened into a larger chamber beyond. It was difficult, but navigable. The four of them split off from the main group and began searching for the entrance to the birth canal. The problem was that Nutty Putty Cave was not thoroughly mapped. There were passages that existed on paper, and there were passages that did not. Areas that had been intentionally left off maps because they were too dangerous, too easy to get lost in, too tempting for people who did not understand the risks. Near the end of the cave, in an area known as Ed's Push, there was an unmapped offshoot, a tight opening that appeared similar to other passages, an opening that looked like it might lead somewhere. John found what he thought was the entrance to the birth canal. It was a waist-high opening in the rock. He got down on his stomach and began to inch forward, using his hips and fingers to propel himself deeper. The passage was tight, but not impossibly so. He had been in tighter spots before. He kept moving forward, expecting to find the turnaround point where the birth canal opened up into the larger chamber beyond. But the passage did not open up. It kept going. It got tighter, and then it angled downward at a severe slope. John realized something was wrong. This was not the birth canal. This was something else, something that was not supposed to be here. He tried to stop, tried to back up, but the angle of the passage and his position made it nearly impossible. He had entered head first into a downward sloping tube measuring 10 inches wide and 18 inches tall. His arms were pinned, one bent awkwardly beneath his chest, the other forced behind his back, and he was upside down, not perfectly vertical, but close enough. The angle was approximately 70 degrees from horizontal. His head was below his feet. His body weight pressed him deeper into the narrowing fissure. Every attempt to move only wedged him tighter. He called out to Josh. His voice was muffled by rock and distance, but eventually Josh found him. All that was visible were John's feet, navy and black running shoes sticking out from a crack in the stone. Josh grabbed his brother's ankles and pulled with everything he had. John moved up an inch, maybe two, but the moment Josh released his grip to readjust, John slid back down. The rock had him. Josh tried again and again, each attempt yielding the same result. The fissure was shaped in such a way that pulling John up required lifting his entire body weight against gravity and friction simultaneously. The angle made it impossible to get proper leverage. The tightness of the space meant Josh could not position himself effectively. John understood the situation better than anyone. He told Josh to go get help. His voice was calm despite the terror he must have felt. "Go get them, brother." It was 9:30 in the evening when Josh left to call for rescue. John waited in the darkness alone, suspended upside down in a space barely wider than his body, 400 feet from the cave entrance, 125 feet below the surface, surrounded by millions of tons of limestone, unable to move, unable to turn, unable to do anything except wait and hope. The first call went out to local rescue services at 9:35 p.m. By midnight, a small army had assembled above the cave. Fire departments, search and rescue teams, cave rescue specialists from across the Wasatch Front, emergency medical personnel. Eventually, 137 people would be involved in the rescue effort, though only a handful would ever make it to where John was trapped. The problem was immediately apparent. To reach John, rescuers would have to navigate the same narrow, twisting passages that had led him to his trap. They would have to crawl on their bellies through spaces barely wider than a washing machine opening. They would have to squeeze through sections that required specific body positioning and breathing techniques, and they would have to do all of this while carrying equipment, knowing that every minute mattered, knowing that John was hanging upside down and that time was working against him. Susie Matola was the first rescuer to reach John. She was slight, 5 feet 3 inches tall, small enough to navigate passages that would stop larger people. She had ropes tied to her ankles so other rescuers could pull her out if she got stuck. 20 minutes of crawling brought her to the end of the passage, where her headlamp finally illuminated John's shoes. She squeezed herself into the tight space beside him. It took effort to position herself so she could see his face. When she finally managed it, John spoke. "Hi, Susie. Thanks for coming, but I really want to get out." His voice was strained but coherent. He was conscious. He was communicating. That was better than she had feared. But as she assessed the situation, her heart sank. The geometry was impossible. John was wedged into a space that narrowed as it descended. His body was compressed on all sides. There was a lip of rock at a critical bend in the passage that essentially functioned like a fishhook, catching the center of his torso. Any attempt to pull him up would drag his midsection across that lip, potentially causing serious injury. And he had been upside down for 3.5 hours already. She tried to comfort him, told him they would get him out, but she knew the truth. This was going to be extraordinarily difficult, maybe impossible. Other rescuers arrived. They brought equipment, ropes, pulleys, carabiners, climbing cams that could be pushed into cracks in the rock to serve as anchor points. They began constructing a system to extract John, but every step was complicated by the extreme tightness of the space. Only one person could be near John at a time. Equipment had to be passed hand to hand through the narrow passages. Communication was difficult. Hours passed, 6 hours, 8 hours, 10 hours. John had now been upside down longer than medical experts considered survivable. Dr. Doug Murdoch, a surgeon on site, explained the physiology to the rescue coordinators. When the human body is inverted, the heart has to work against gravity to pump blood out of the brain. Normally, gravity assists with this process. Inverted, the heart is fighting physics with every beat. After 8 to 10 hours, organ failure typically begins. The heart cannot sustain the effort indefinitely. But John was still alive, still conscious, still talking to rescuers when they could reach him. A caver named Ryan Schertz made his way down to John around noon the next day. Ryan was 6 feet 1 inch tall but whip-thin and flexible, seemingly immune to claustrophobia despite spending most of his life exploring caves. But when he reached the narrow crevice where John was trapped, he had to fight back tears. The geometry looked impossible. John was not just stuck. He was consumed by the rock, his body swallowed in a way that defied easy solution. Ryan positioned himself as close as he could get. He loosened the knots that earlier rescuers had tied around John's legs. He stretched a tube down to John's mouth that was attached to a pouch of Gatorade so John could drink. He tried to offer comfort in any way he could. They talked about faith, about family, about John's wife Emily and daughter Lizzie and the baby that would be born in June. They spoke in Spanish, both having served missions for the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, Ryan in Texas and John in Ecuador. The conversation seemed to help John focus, to pull him back from the edge of panic that kept threatening to overwhelm him. Meanwhile, above them, rescue teams were constructing something ambitious. a sophisticated rope and pulley system that would provide enough mechanical advantage to lift John's body weight against gravity and friction. They drilled holes into the cave walls to create anchor points. They strung rope through nearly 15 pulleys arranged in a complex configuration. The rope closest to John ran through a natural arch in the ceiling just above the crack where he was wedged. The work took hours. Drilling into limestone in such a confined space with limited equipment was painstakingly slow. When rescuers tried to widen the passage using chisels, it took an hour and a half to drill through just 6 inches of rock. Larger tools could not fit down the narrow passages. Smaller tools worked too slowly to make a real difference. They considered other options. Someone suggested using 6 gallons of vegetable oil to lubricate John's body and try to slide him out. Others discussed using small explosives to widen the passage, but the risk of collapsing the tunnel or injuring John was too great. Breaking his legs was mentioned as a possibility, but doctors warned that the shock could cause cardiac arrest given John's weakened state. The pulley system seemed like the best option, maybe the only option. By 4 p.m. on November 25th, the system was ready. John had been trapped for 19 hours. His voice was weaker now. His breathing had taken on a gurgling quality that suggested fluid was pooling in his lungs. But he was still alive, still able to respond when Ryan spoke to him. Ryan explained what was about to happen. 8 people above would pull on the rope in coordinated efforts. Ryan would push on John's legs to guide him upward. John would need to push with his hands if he could, though his arms were pinned in positions that made this difficult. They would work slowly, carefully, giving John time to rest between pulls. "Okay, John," Ryan said. "I need your help. I need you to make sure you are pushing with your hands. I am going to push you this way." Above them, 8 rescuers positioned themselves on the rope. On Ryan's signal, they pulled. The rope went taut, the pulleys creaked, and John's body began to move. 1 inch, 2 inches, 3 inches. He was coming up. The system was working. With each pull, John moved a little farther from the trap that had held him for so long. They pulled again. John rose higher. Ryan could see his face now for the first time. His eyes were red and tired. His face was covered in mud, but he was smiling. He said something about how uncomfortable he was, how badly he wanted this to be over. He was coherent. He was going to make it. They pulled a 3rd time. John rose high enough that his feet hit the low ceiling of the passage. The sudden contact made him scream. The pain in his legs was excruciating. They had been blue and pulseless for hours, nerve damaged from lack of circulation. Ryan called for the team to lower John slightly to give him a rest. They prepared for the 4th pull, the pull that would clear the lip of rock that had been holding John in place. The team above pulled. The rope went taut. John began to rise, and then one of the anchor points failed. There are conflicting accounts of exactly what happened. Some reports say a bolt pulled out of the limestone. Others say the rock around the anchor crumbled. One of the rescuers who was there, Ryan Schertz himself, would later insist that a piece of webbing broke, not an anchor. But the result was the same. The entire pulley system went suddenly slack. The 8 people pulling on the rope fell backward, and John, who had been rising toward freedom, dropped back into the fissure. A large carabiner came loose in the chaos and struck Ryan in the face with tremendous force. He blacked out instantly. When he came to moments later, his face was covered in blood. His tongue had been nearly severed. His upper lip was split and swelling rapidly. But his first words were not about his injuries. He asked if someone else could take his place with John. Someone had to stay with John. Ryan's father, Dave Schertz, crawled down to replace his injured son. He positioned himself near John and spoke to him. Dave noticed immediately that John was asking about Ryan. "Is he okay? I think he is really hurt bad." Even in his own desperate situation, John's concern was for the rescuer who had been injured trying to save him. Dave tried to tie a rope around John's waist to prepare for another attempt with the pulley system, but as he lowered himself into the wider part of the crack to position the rope, he realized the space was too tight. He asked John to suck in his stomach to create more room. John did not respond. Dave asked again. Still nothing. Dave looked more closely at John in the dim light of his headlamp. John's breathing had changed. It was shallow now, irregular. His eyes were closed. Dave tried to back out of the space he had wedged himself into to position the rope. It took effort, He got stuck briefly, had to push and wriggle to free himself. When he finally emerged from the passage, he found the rescue coordinator and delivered the news no one wanted to hear. He is dying right now. He has a heartbeat, but he has had difficulty breathing before I got there. You cannot get someone down there before he dies. Another rescuer, Brandon Kowalis, immediately volunteered to take Dave's place. He was the last person to see John alive. Brandon brought a two-way radio down so Emily could speak to her husband one final time. She talked to him from the surface, not knowing if he could hear her, telling him she loved him, telling him to keep fighting. Brandon reported that John made no response. His breathing had become a wet gurgle. He was slipping away. By 11 p.m., John was unresponsive. A medical professional crawled down to assess his condition. At 11:56 p.m. on November 25, 2009, 27 hours after he became stuck, John Edward Jones was pronounced dead. The cause was cardiac arrest. His heart, exhausted from fighting gravity for more than a day, simply gave out. The inverted position, the compression of his chest, the panic and stress, the physical trauma of the failed rescue attempt, all of it combined to place demands on his cardiovascular system that it could not sustain. 137 rescuers, 27 hours of effort, sophisticated equipment and desperate measures, and it was not enough. The question of what to do with John's body arose immediately. The rescue coordinator spoke with the Jones family and explained the reality. Extracting John from the cave would require weeks of work with heavy drilling equipment and potentially explosives. The passage would need to be significantly widened. The work would be extraordinarily dangerous for the crews involved. There was a real possibility that attempting to recover the body could destabilize the entire cave system and result in additional deaths. And for what purpose? John was gone. His body could not benefit from recovery. The only question was whether the risk to living rescuers was justified. The Jones family, devastated and exhausted, made a decision that few families should ever have to make. They agreed that John would remain where he was. Nutty Putty Cave would become his final resting place. On December 9, 2009, work crews returned to the cave. They used explosives to collapse the ceiling in the area near where John's body lay. Then they sealed all entrances to the cave system with concrete. Thousands of pounds of it poured into every opening, every crack, every possible way in or out. Blowhole Hill was no longer a gateway to the underground. It was a tomb. Today, if you visit the site where Nutty Putty Cave once opened onto the world, you will find concrete, gray and solid and permanent. You will find the memorial plaques. You will find a hill that looks like any other hill in the Utah desert. And below, in perfect darkness, in unchanging temperature, in absolute stillness, the cave holds what it will never release. John Edward Jones remains where he fell, 400 feet of stone between him and the sky, surrounded by millions of tons of limestone, preserved in the place where his life ended. The earth opened for him once, just wide enough to enter, just narrow enough to trap. It will not open again. If you found this story as haunting as we did, please consider liking this video and subscribing to Grim True for more deep dives into true stories that remind us how quickly everything can change. Thank you for watching.